Okay, so we're back again for our next captivating panel discussion. This one is about navigating the NDIS, access and complaints. Who fits where and why? So I'm going to just throw it over to our panellists to introduce themselves again, so I don't make a fool of myself and you guys get a concise explanation.
Okay, I'm Miranda Bruyniks. I'm the Complaints Commissioner with the new NDIS Commission. So we started in New South Wales in South Australia from the 1st of July 2018, and from the 1st of July 2019 we've rolled out to a further five states and territories, which is Queensland, Victoria, Tasmania, Northern Territory, ACT, and I think that's the lot. I've missed one? Oh. Okay.
My name is Fiona Sawyers. I'm a Senior Assistant Ombudsman with the Office of the Commonwealth Ombudsman. We have jurisdiction to investigate complaints about the National Disability Insurance Agency. Providers of disability services are not within our jurisdiction. Those sorts of complaints would normally go to either the Quality and Safeguards Commission or to one of the state-based disability commissioners, depending on what the service is. We do actually also have oversight over the National Disability Insurance Scheme Quality and Safeguards Commission itself. We take both individual complaints, so complaints from individuals or complaints on behalf of individuals from advocates such as yourselves, and we will make a decision about whether or not it is within scope and whether we can investigate it. We also look for systemic issues in our complaints, and we'll look to see whether or not there is a more systemic problem that's going on that we'll choose to investigate. For instance, last year we released a report in terms of the National Disability Insurance Agency's administration of reviews. So, and I don't have one of those to hold up, unfortunately, but it is available on our website.
My name's Samantha Dooley. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm from the Disability Services Commissioner's Office, and I'm the manager for the Capacity Development Team. So part of my role within the Disability Service Commissioner, and I'll just call it DSC, is to do education, information, making resources accessible so that people understand what's going on in the complaints world. And making complaints hopefully as straightforward as possible for people to be able to raise their concerns. I think I usually look at at the moment I see the role of DSC and the history of DSC in about 3 phases. So most of you are probably aware that since about 2007, the Disability Services Commissioner has been around to take complaints about registered disability services in Victoria. So we're a state-based complaints body. So that meant that we were always looking at DHHS funded services. Then there's a second stage of our, I suppose, lifespan, which is when the NDIS came through into the trial sites and started to roll into and transition into states and territories, but into Victoria for us. So our role and our contact with the NDIS is because it's a federally funded sort of scheme. We don't take complaints about the NDIA or NDIS, but we do take, and in our second stage, we've been involved in taking complaints about either the role of local area coordinators who are registered disability services in Victoria, and we know that that's Brotherhood of St Lawrence, La Trobe Community Health Services and Interreach. So we've taken complaints about their people's experience with them, not the outcome of their plan, because that's a federal sort of component. We've then also taken complaints about people's experience when they've received service as part of their NDIS funding, if that service was delivered by a state-based registered disability service in Victoria. So that's sort of the second phase of our lifespan. And now from the 1st of July, I suppose I see us as we're slowly winding back, and that was referenced early on in one of the other talks that we had. I think Bruce mentioned it. Is that we will be winding up. We will be finishing in Victoria probably at this stage by the end to mid to end of next year, and because all of those people who are eligible for the NDIS will have hopefully transitioned into that. So now our interaction with NDIS is part of that complex web that people are having to navigate through right now. So yeah, my responses will come from those perspectives.
And good afternoon. My name is Chris Cahill from the community and mainstream engagement team within the National Disability Insurance Agency here in Victoria. And my team are involved in ensuring that there's opportunities for members of the community to come and learn, understand, and are confident about their next step in the NDIS journey. And so we have a range of events that are promoted on the NDIS website to offer that opportunity for people to come along and receive some advice about that next step. We also work continuously with the 11 mainstream areas of government that are also involved in or have an interface with the NDIS. So whether that is education, employment, child protection, justice, young people in aged care, a range of other areas where that workforce, family violence, those workforces need to know a bit about how the NDIS operates, how someone can access it, what does it mean to have an NDIS plan, and what else could be expected from the community in which you live. And so we try to, together with our partners in the community, the local area coordinators and the early childhood, early intervention partners, try to ensure that knowledge and advice is available.
Great. Okay, so coming to the first question, which is, what are the most common complaints you see in relation to the NDIS?
So within the NDIS, the most common complaints relate to the plan that a person might have. That would be the most common complaint, is that my plan is not sufficient to meet my needs, and therefore I need to talk again with somebody to review that and progress some change. Beyond that, it's considerations around whether I am eligible and meet the requirements of access to the scheme. And so for many people, it's a complaint about I've provided all of this evidence and information, yet I've been found to be ineligible and don't meet access to the scheme. So what happens? And so that's perhaps another common complaint. There's also complaints that are received about, so I've received a plan, I think it's insufficient, and I've put in for a Section 48 review, and that review request has been considered, and it's been found that my statement of claims is not sufficient to warrant a further review. And so people put in complaints about not being able to progress what they might see as their right to have a formal review. And there'll be a range of reasons why that might not be suitable to proceed. So they're the three most common things.
Would you think that perhaps better educated LACs would help with this?
It's very much a work in progress. Sometimes, you know, when I wake up in the morning, it's all quite overwhelming, this new system that has transformed the way in which disability supports are provided in Australia. There's such a massive social and economic reform that is just a few years in. Yet we have, as would have been said many times through the last 2 days, 300,000 participants now up and into the scheme, 80,000 Victorians who are up and into the scheme, which came from, you know, that has exploded since the middle of 2016. And so it's very much a journey, and as it is for the National Disability Insurance Agency staff and our partners in the community, that all of us need to keep building our knowledge, building our expertise to provide this system. And likewise for service providers and others who are connected into the scheme, that because of the constant change that occurs within how the NDIA or the NDIS is delivered, that keeping up with the latest news is a real need amongst the whole sector. We're in a stage of a range of further transitions that are occurring, and that I imagine Vicky would have expressed yesterday, that the Disability Reform Council's changes, the opportunities through building a more inclusive Australia through the release of ILC grants, that on the last panel there was talk about the hospital discharge framework. There will later be work that will occur around the justice setting and liaison staff who will work within prisons. So this whole unfolding will continue for quite some time yet, until the scheme is mature.
If I might just talk about the type of complaints received by the NDIS Commission since we started, and the difference between the complaints that we're talking about with the NDIA is about the planning and the eligibility. The NDIS Commission was established as a Quality and Safeguarding Commission over service providers. So the type of complaints that we take at the NDIS Commission are about the provision of a funded NDIS service. So what happened when you received your service, and why is it that things are not going in a way that you thought it would? The Commission has been taking complaints and has had well over 1,000 complaints in New South Wales and South Australia in the last year, in terms of looking at the types of service delivery issues that are core to the way people perceive what they're getting and the issues. It's very similar to some of the themes that have been shared with you by state bodies such as the Disability Services Commissioner and the New South Wales Ombudsman in New South Wales, where quite commonly communication is a key theme. So we get complaints about how it was communicated to me, or it was not communicated to me in a way that I understood, and so therefore it caused problems. The way that funding and services are delivered in terms of whether that met the expectations of what I understood when I first met with that service provider, and I thought that service provider was in fact delivering me a service that looked different to what I received. The quality and safety of services themes include policies and procedures. So a lot of complaints relate to the fact that I've already made a complaint to my service provider. They didn't hear me, they didn't acknowledge me, they didn't take the basic steps to follow up on my complaint, so therefore I'm going to make a complaint to the NDIS Commission. And then we have a small portion of complaints that relate to abuse and neglect, because all of us here understand that those types of complaints are not normally made by people who are subject to abuse, and they're more likely to come to us through our reportable incidents function. But we do receive complaints about both registered and unregistered providers, and there are actions that the Commission can take when there are non-compliance issues identified. And even with an unregistered provider, if they're not delivering services in accordance with the Code of Conduct, and the NDIS Commission publishes a Code of Conduct, it provides a training module, a worker orientation training module, which you're all welcome to go online and have a look at. You can even do the module yourself and get a certificate, but that's online. In terms of helping workers to understand what the minimum standard is for delivery of service. Minimum. And if there's a breach of that code of conduct, the Commission has powers to act. So they have, if they've breached a fairly serious area of the code of conduct, the Commission could ban a worker, for instance. So.
And just, I suppose, from the Disability Services Commissioner's perspective, it's we've always really welcomed the rollout of a national scheme, because I think Victoria's been very fortunate to have a commissioner that's focused specifically on people with disability, and being, keeping service providers accountable. So to have a scheme that then covers the whole of Australia and means that there's consistent quality and safeguard across all of Australia, then that's something we're really excited about. And so we, because we don't take complaints about non-registered providers, that's not something within our remit. So certainly hearing some of the things that Miranda mentioned, that's good news from our perspective. But from the perspective of the last 12 months or so, or 2 years of what was in scope for us in relation and complaints we might receive about people's experience, because we know that a complaint is when someone's expectations and their experience don't match. And that's been something that we're aware of for 12 years that we've been around, and it still will always be what a complaint is. It's actually not complicated. It's when someone's not happy, when they're expecting something and they get something that's below par.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that we have heard about is about, and Miranda mentioned this, it's about the communication. People sometimes don't even know how to complain. They might have to fill out a really long form, and certainly from our office's perspective, we've removed forms because we know that people actually will ring up and talk to us, or they email, and we'll work that way. But we have continued to get complaints about people's experience in communicating, particularly with local area coordinators, because that's our scope. They've found sometimes, and these might all resonate for you, that maybe, and I think somebody mentioned it in that question from the last panel of, I kept ringing my LAC, I rang and finally found they'd left the organisation. Those sort of complaints, those things have been something that have been consistent, and support coordination is the other thing that people have called us about while it was in our scope, because we could take complaints about people's experience with their support coordination, and we have found that people are really confused about support coordination. Is that fair to say? It's really quite an element of confusion, and I know, Chris, I might be wrong, but I believe that the NDIA are reviewing support coordination in your processes over the coming months. Is that right?
Yes.
But that's our in-scope ones. Then we also just get things that are out of our scope, and we have to work really closely with making sure that when we get a call, people say, I don't know where this goes to because I don't know who's who in the zoo anymore. So we have to work closely with the Quality and Safeguard Commission now that they're in place. The NDIA, we've always worked very closely with them. We Commonwealth Ombudsman. There's a lot of, having to work because I think everyone is genuinely trying to help make a potentially confusing time less confusing for people with disability who just want to have, I think we heard, the ordinary life. They just want to get on with their life.
Yeah.
So that's my thoughts.
Okay.
And in terms of the Commonwealth Ombudsman, we've seen complaints to our office about the NDIA grow year on year, which isn't surprising as the scheme has been rolling out. Last year we had a bit over 1,700 complaints. And what we found is that the issues that are complained about don't tend to change too much year to year. Around a third of our complaints are about reviews. They're either about internal reviews of decisions or unscheduled plan reviews. We've got around about 13% of our complaints are around planning, and so the planning process, the participant plans that are developed, and we've got around about 13% are also about assistive technology and home modifications. We think that's grown a little bit recently, and that's one of the areas that we're monitoring quite closely at the moment.
All right. I might jump in there because the timer was frozen for about 10 minutes there, so I didn't actually know how much time we have to go, but we've got to rush now. So what are the most common remedies participants seek when they complain about the NDIS?
Oh, well, I might start.
Please do.
So for a service provider, most commonly people are seeking acknowledgement that a mistake was made or that they weren't heard, and sometimes even an apology. But largely they're seeking for a change or some action about how their service is delivered. So they're looking for things to change in the service delivery. And then lastly, they are often looking to have all of that acknowledged in a way that it improves the services for others. So I had this experience, I don't want it to happen to anyone else. So, that's probably the three core areas when we're talking about complaints about service delivery.
So some of those would be similar for the Commonwealth Ombudsman. Absolutely, sometimes people are looking for an apology. Many of the complaints we get are about delays, sort of delays in accessing, either delays in reviews or accessing services. So frequently what people are after is to get some action happening. And the other thing is actually basic communication. They just want to understand the decision that's been taken, because frequently the information that's provided won't necessarily make sense. It won't refer back to the reasons why a decision has been taken and those sorts of things. So just being able to provide a clearer explanation is frequently what people really want.
I love all this talk because I've been teaching, getting out to service providers, talking about what we call the 4As. And I don't know if anyone's ever done 4As training with the Disability Service Commissioner, but basically we talk about when people have a complaint, they want exactly what Miranda and Fiona were talking about. They want an acknowledgement, they want answers, they want action, and they may or may not want an apology. It's sort of not that complicated, and that sort of framework is something that as a worker, as a family member, as a participant, everyone should know that. It's something that actually helps people speak up and gives them a sort of a confidence and to know that complaints are a normal thing. And I think, like Fiona mentioned, it's sort of all based on communication. But I think one of the things that really stands out for me is that people want to be involved in the solution. They don't want to be told what the answer is. They want to be part of that conversation. They want to have some response. They want to, work together because they want to keep having a voice.
What they don't want, what they don't want is to hear that information that they've provided has been lost, or the complaint that they put in last week can't be found. And so what we have done is improve our internal systems within the scheme to ensure that that doesn't happen, and that we're working hard to ensure that complaints and requests for review are actioned in a much more timely manner by ensuring there's more focus on that, clearer instructions and systems to enable that.
Okay. Given the negative attention the NDIS has been receiving in the media recently, what do you think some things the NDIA can do? What do you think are some things the NDIA can do to change its perception? Or the perception of the public, I guess. Is to keep evolving in the NDIS, to keep promoting the way in which the system is designed to operate. And that is often not known by people. People say, I've got a disability, therefore the NDIS is for me, which is not necessarily the case. No. It's for a percentage of Australians with a disability, people who have significant impairments that impact on their ability to function in their day-to-day life, and that condition is permanent. So for other people, there are alternatives and systems to help support them. But in this enormous social and economic change that is occurring, need to keep our head up, put it up above the cloud to see what is occurring, that it's not all negative news stories, that there is a lot that is reflected in the outcomes data and the outcomes information, which is being made more available to everybody to view. If you were to refer now to our data and insights page on the NDIS website, you would see that a growing amount of information is now being publicly made available. We have 300,000 participants, so utilising unidentified information, we're able to share more about what is being achieved, and then some deep dive informations into areas, particular areas within the scheme, like autism and what is occurring there, support for families. Soon it will be information on psychosocial disability and how that is working with the NDIS, and also this month information about thin markets and what is the market landscape for Australia for providers. So keep promoting those
and ensuring that what the Minister Robert has said is, the next 20% of people to enter the NDIS are the people perhaps who need a little bit more help, a little bit more support, and ensuring that people know where that support can be found through their local area coordinators or their NDIA office, through your help to continue to help people often in vulnerable situations. We come across families in schools who are yet to progress into the NDIS because they just can't manage it right now. There's too much of going on in their life, and so we can help them take that next step. And keep telling, on our Reimagine Today website, as well as the NDIS website, keep telling the good news stories as well.
I've heard some great, the NDIS has changed the lives of some of my friends. I do have to say that I'm yet to apply, and I'm a little bit iffy whether I'm eligible. But anyway, next question is, what do you see as the best path towards reducing waiting times? And I think this is probably pointed towards you, Chris.
Yeah. So there have been some pain points within the NDIS. The wait time to have an answer about access to the scheme has been one. The wait time for early childhood participants entering the pathway, the wait time for to have a review decision advised have been some of the areas. And so being focused primarily on ensuring that there's transition into the scheme for people, that has been the focus of the last few years, to move from the old systems to the new to a large extent. That now we're coming to a time where fixing up the systems within the agency to ensure that work is completed more timely, that we've been trialling, and we did here in Victoria last year, trial side-by-side planning, where an LAC and a NDIA planner worked together to finalise a plan so that there was better understanding achieved for the participant and their support group. That trial has now been extended in other states, and that was found here in Victoria to reduce the request numbers for review because there was greater understanding achieved at that first point of contact. So initiatives like that we hope will make a difference.
Yeah, okay, so it's basically teething problems is what you're saying.
It's enormous transition, and so it's a transformation. It has disrupted systems of times gone by, and everyone is trying to get used to this new way of working.
Yeah, evolution takes time.
And it does. It will take time, and it's to get to the mature state, and many of the things that Bruce spoke about, to have that in place will take another few years. But hopefully we'll be able to acknowledge improvement.
Okay, so very quickly, from a systematic point of view, what are the most common issues that arise from access and use of the NDIS? Try and keep your answers confined.
Mine's confined.
Yes.
I'm actually not going to answer this question. Because we're not NDIS immersed, I thought, I'm not going to answer this one. So there you go.
And anyone else?
Yeah. Well, access and eligibility sits with the NDIA, and then Commonwealth Ombudsman may have some comments.
So we've got some general comments in terms of the systemic issues that we're seeing, and it's not so much that arise from the access and use, but just the systemic issues that we are seeing in terms of people accessing the NDIA. So reviews, again, I've pointed to that to us seems to be a systemic issue in how they're managed, the timeliness of those sorts of things. We're closely monitoring the implementation of recommendations that we made in a report we released last year. Assistive technology, I said it's one of the areas that we're seeing an increase in complaints to our office. We acknowledge that the NDIA is working on addressing its processes for handling requests for assistive technology, but we're still seeing examples We've got case studies of people who are getting really ordinary experiences when they're interacting with the NDIA, and it does seem to be an issue. Participant pathways is something that we're actively monitoring, and we're really pleased to see the work that's going into better participant pathways. So there's some of the systemic issues that we're seeing at the moment that we are looking at and monitoring.
Yeah. There are many plans afoot to address some of the systemic issues that are occurring in the NDIS. The Disability Reform Council initiatives, the 5 major announcements, which were just the beginning of some major changes that are rolling out over these next couple of months, where, there's been confusion perhaps between what is expected of a mainstream interface service. What are they expected to provide versus what is the NDIS to provide? And so a lot more clarity is now coming to what that difference would be. So the health system, major changes from the 1st of October about what will be expected there versus what the NDIS will fund. Changes in relation to voluntary out-of-home care and what is available to be funded in an NDIS package, including 24/7 support. The hospital discharge framework, the work with health liaison officers put in place, the justice work with ensuring that people are able to transition out of prison successfully connected to supports so that they can go home and those supports can start to occur, are just some of the things. But the opportunity that is right now is available at engage.dss.gov.au for everybody who is here to participate in the NDIS, in informing what should be the NDIS of the future.
Cool. Okay, last question. How can the current complaint system, now this is something that's close to my heart as a part of Voice at the Table, how can the current complaint system be improved and be made more accessible to participants? Because ultimately they are the centre of this, are they not?
So Eva, I think that's a fantastic question and one that we all work together on. I mean, if anyone, sometimes the complaint system can be very complicated, and quite honestly, I don't have an expectation that people should understand which parts of their complaint they take to which body. We all work together, and if we identify that there's a complaint that doesn't sit with us, we support people to understand where to take that complaint. It's a warm referral process. But the Quality and Safeguards Framework, which was the piece of work that was done before the NDIS Commission was established, was about consultation between the Department of Social Services. A lot of the people here in this room contributed in that consultation, and all states and territories. And one of the things that was raised as an answer to this question was to have one national complaints process for people to complain about their service delivery. So at the moment, across states and territory, there's many different systems. But with the entry of the NDIS Commission from the 1st of July, in every state and territory except Western Australia, people can make a complaint about their funded NDIS service to the NDIS Commission in the same way. It's not complicated. You can either make a phone call. If you don't like making phone calls, you can fill out the contact complaint form on the website to say, would you phone me? Would you email me? Would you please get an interpreter for me? I have a communication aid, so therefore I have some preferences for my communication, and we will communicate in a way that's accessible for people who contact us.
Excellent. That's great to hear.
And just bringing it in slightly to some work that the Ombudsman's Office has done over the last couple of years, we went out and got a consultant in to have a look at our complaint handling processes and how accessible they were for people with disability. Coming out of that were a number of recommendations about things like streamlining our telephone menus when people ring so that it's easier for people to access. We had the awful situation where I think someone complained to us about us at some point because they weren't able, we were requiring them to actually be able to use a push-button phone or a touch phone, and they couldn't. Therefore, they couldn't access our service. So we've addressed that.
Yeah.
We've looked at things like the messages on our website, the writing on our website to get it plain English. We're looking at getting some easy English products developed. We've been rolling out training to some of our intake staff, so the people who answer the phone calls, to try and make sure that we are an organisation that can role model to other Commonwealth agencies about how you can be disability aware and mature in the service that you're providing. And so that's something that we're also trying to roll out. We have a training program that we roll out to that we're rolling out to Commonwealth agencies as well about complaint handling services, and we are covering off on accessibility as part of that.
This is great. It's a brave new world out there. Okay.
We do a lot of work with, particularly over the last 18 months, we've done a lot of work with people with disabilities actually and actively being involved in the work we do, whether it's a research project we've recently done on building safe and respectful cultures, or going out and working with advocacy services to meet with networks of people with disability who are self-advocates. So we try and we know we can always do things better, and even though DSC is winding up, we are still working very hard to develop resources that are accessible. We actually know that accessible resources benefit everybody. So one of the things you might find on your table, and I'm doing a bit of a John Chesterman here. So on your table, my staff have put these little magnets. So it's because whilst DSC is winding back, we still take complaints about registered disability services in Victoria, and there are still people who haven't transitioned into the NDIS yet. So we know that they still require a role of a commission, somewhere to go to when they're not happy with the quality of service they're receiving. So that's why we will be around for some time next year until everybody has rolled into that scheme to sit beside this magnet. And you can, I mean, we can send these out if you contact our office, and you can ask for these if these are helpful, because we're just trying to give a sense of what the context is. There's actually another form that you might see is just a bit of an information sheet that maybe expands a bit more on this, because it doesn't go into Commonwealth Ombudsman or Administrative Appeals Tribunal, but we will be working on more resources as we try and just present the sort of overview of where we still sit in there, because we still take complaints about the in-kind transfer group homes. So for those DHHS houses that are transferring, those people remain through the bilateral agreement. They are still are being funded through the Department of Health and Human Services. So we take complaints about a group home that is in those spaces of Aruma, which was House with No Steps, and Tipping, also Life Without Barriers, Melba, Scope at Home, and Possibility. So we take the complaints about them. We also take complaints for people who's still on their ISP and they're transitioning over to the NDIS, or if they're funded services that are never going to at this stage transition over, or not until some time. So forensics is another part of where we take complaints. And we also have an element that if your complaint is about something that was before the 1st of July, and even if it's now NDIS funded, but it was a registered provider before the 1st of July, we work with the Quality and Safeguard Commission to work out whose jurisdiction that is as well, because their focus is from the 1st of July onwards, 2019, and we look at beforehand. Is that pretty clear, Chris?
If you could contain it to a couple of minutes.
We welcome complaints or feedback in whatever form a person is happy to provide that in. So whether they use the feedback area of our website or phone, or come into one of our offices or a local area coordinator, whatever, or write, whatever form it takes, or with support of an advocate or another person, it's welcome, and we'll manage it from there.
Great. Okay, we nearly have 20 minutes for questions, so I'm going to throw it out to you guys. Okay, just waiting for the microphone. Okay.
Hi everyone, Melissa Cahill from Dooley here. I have a question for all of you. Daru, by default, rather than design, gets a lot of calls from people with disability in crisis, wanting an advocate or wanting to complain about something that's happened to them, and often they're quite distressing calls. My staff have to do quite a bit of research working out who is the right person to complain to. And as we've heard before, it is really complicated. It depends if you have NDIS or not, if the provider's registered or not, if you're under or over 65, it all depends. I wonder if there is any work being done between all your organisations about having a no wrong door approach. Because when people with disabilities call, they are upset. They are tired, they are distressed, they don't want to tell their stories 10 different times. They don't want to ring, then ring again, then ring again. So is there any work being done across your 4 organisations just to try and make that easier for people who want to complain?
Yes, Melissa, we've got that process in place across organisations in each state and territory. I think, if you give any of us a call and we identify that the complaint belongs with another body, we'll support that. I have a contact centre based in Penrith that takes the national calls. They take, thousands of calls every week. And those contact centre operators are very sensitive to people who might have come to us that belongs somewhere else, and they're very careful to help and explain where they should take that complaint. So, we've got active work underway in terms of making sure that warm referral process occurs.
I agree. We know it's complex, and we've been working very hard. Our resolutions team receive all those inquiries and complaints, and do have also quite distressing conversations with people. So we absolutely agree that it's at a time when some people don't want to be mucked around with, and sometimes we'll get calls where people will say, I've spoken to these people and they've said to call this person, and so we, like Miranda said, we have pathways directly to the NDIS Commission. We also have pathways that we work directly to NDIA, because there are complaints that come to our office that are not within our scope because it's a federal matter. So we're trying to, all the time, keep directing and supporting people. And sometimes people call us because in Victoria there may be the people they know of that number. So we're trying very hard to... Do we get it right 100% of the time? I don't think we do. We are trying very hard to do that, though. No.
Okay. Anybody else?
Hi, this is Bronwyn from AMIDA. It stands for Action for More Independence and Dignity in Accommodation. Very long name, but the acronym is AMIDA. I've got a question about, we've had some inquiries from people around restrictive practices in new SDA, Specialist Disability Accommodation builds, which are being built by perhaps families or developers that are not very familiar with regulations. And I'm wondering if people are housed in SDA where they're finding there is restrictive practice, where can they complain to?
They can complain to the NDIS Commission. So if it's about a service provider funded by the NDIA, bring the complaint to us. So I think there was a question before, would you like me to answer that question now around restrictive practices? Yeah. Yes. So the NDIS Commission is the first national body to regulate disability service providers in a consistent way when it comes to the unauthorised use of restrictive practice. So the senior practitioner, Dr. Jeffrey Chan, leads this work, but you would be aware that Australia signed up to the United Nations Convention of Rights for People with Disability. As part of that work, there is an undertaking or a commitment by Australia to reduce or eliminate restrictive practices. So as part of the work of the NDIS Commission with service providers, we are working to, one, identify cases where restrictive practice or unauthorised restrictive practice is being used. And as such, it is a requirement of all registered providers, and only registered providers can deliver behaviour support, to report to the Commission any of those uses as a unauthorised use of restrictive practice. Secondly, there is monthly reporting to the senior practitioner about the use of restrictive practices so it can be monitored in terms of whether they're being used appropriately. The expectation of the Commission is that every use of restrictive practice is part of a behaviour support plan, or a positive behaviour support plan, I should say. And that positive behaviour support plan has been established not just to say, oh, it's okay, it's actually established to say, no, it's not okay, and these are the things we're doing to support the person to reduce the use of restrictive practice and eventually eliminate it. So the expectation is that over many years we will see a reduction of the use of these practices in the disability sector. There is a long history. And if we go back, I heard Bruce mention the evolution of services before, but if we go back to the institutionalised days of disability, there was a long-term use of restrictive practices. Here in Victoria, there's been a senior practitioner and there's been some processes in place for some time. It's different to what was in Queensland. It's different to what exists in other states and territories. So as a national body, since the 1st of July 2019, without Western Australia, what we're already seeing is the reporting of the use of unauthorised use of restrictive practice. So we're already engaging with providers about what ought to be in place under the transitional arrangements, and when transition ends, there'll be firm compliance arrangements. So what we will see in the next 3 years is the beginnings of a change in behaviour as a consequence of what we're doing there.
Can I just add that with state-funded services, the Disability Service Commissioner continue to review incident reports. So whilst that's, unfortunately the issue may have already occurred, that is something that will still continue as our oversight role until we hand over the role fully and step out of the work that we do. And Miranda, your office has reportable incidents, so that is also looking at what practices are restrictive that haven't been picked up and aren't complying with requirements as well. So I just want to add that.
I might just clarify for people. Yep. So all NDIS service providers have an obligation to report to the Commission. All the registered NDIS service providers have an obligation to report certain incidents which include unauthorised use of restrictive practice. From the 1st of July 2019, that applies to all funded NDIS providers. There are still some providers in Victoria that are not funded by the NDIA and they're going through to the Disability Services Commissioner.
Okay. There's a question up the back there. Yeah, I worked for Women with Disabilities Victoria, and we facilitated trainings about violence against women with disabilities, and that's a huge whirlpool of horror that I'd never been aware of, and I can well understand this whole restrictive practice thing. But anyway, on to the question.
Can I ask what work you're doing on the WHO 11? Now, Australia's come up to 11, America's only still on 9. Because of that, there has been an increase in reporting of restrictive practices because the Association of Psychiatrists in New South Wales have been reluctant to put down medication as a restrictive practice. But now, because of the wording in the WHO 11 under mental disorder, and one of those listing is autism, for example, they add the clinicians writing the positive behaviour report plans or BIS plans, whichever terminology that they want to use, are absolutely legally required to report that. So can I ask what work you're doing on the WHO 11 that's requiring that?
Okay, so firstly, the work that the senior practitioner is leading for the NDIS Commission is about those services that are funded by the NDIA. I think you might be referring to some medical services or some health services that don't come within our jurisdiction. Okay.
Are legally required because of the WHO 11. That's why I'm asking specifically what work you're doing with that. I can only speak about the Association of Psychiatrists and also the clinicians in New South Wales. The Association of Psychiatrists don't want to report it as such, but the clinicians are legally required to do so under WHO 11.
So I'm going to take that question on notice, and our senior practitioner, Dr. Jeffrey Chan, will be able to provide some information.
Great.
The Commission has, under the leadership of Dr. Jeffrey Chan, already provided on the website and to registered providers our capability framework in terms of the practitioners that can approve support plans, behaviour support plans. If you might just write that down and give it to me, I will make sure I get back to you.
Hello, I promise for a very efficient question. I was wondering, I understand the complaints process for service providers and for the NDIA, where does the process go for LACs and early childhood partners?
So LACs and early childhood intervention or partners are both subject to the Code of Conduct under the NDIS Commission. So they are under contract with the NDIA, and so there is opportunities there in terms of making a complaint to the NDIA about things that are related to funding or the way that they're actually acting in their contractual relationship. But the Code of Conduct applies when it comes to the way they deliver the service. So it's a little bit the same as what Chris described before. If it's about access, eligibility, funding, the complaint goes to the NDIA. But if it's about the way the person was treated, the Code of Conduct, there was no respect or, there was a lack of consideration of the person's desire to express their own, have the freedom to express their own individuality, then those sorts of things a complaint can be made to the NDIS Commission. And once again, sometimes it can be a mix of those things, and then we'll just make sure that, we get it right in terms of the right issues going to the right body.
And if the individual has complained to the NDIA about those parts of the service that relate to the NDIA's contract management and they're not happy with the response they've had from the NDIA, they can complain to the Commonwealth Ombudsman's office. We've got jurisdiction to investigate where services have been outsourced by a Commonwealth body to do that service to provide that service on behalf of the Commonwealth body.
And hopefully that it would all begin with, trying to resolve things locally with the service, with the partner, or if that's not working, that relationship that is being experienced is not achieving the outcome wanted, then perhaps speaking with a more senior person within that organisation to begin with, then utilising any of the other forms of making that complaint and being able to feel as though that's being heard. So whether that's within the agency to begin with or one of the other channels.
I think the only thing I'd add is the challenge is that for some people they are still not a participant in the scheme. So when they have an experience with an LAC, they don't actually. There are still people who are going through that. Sort of touching. Look, to be honest, it's something that's been a little bit tricky for us because we were trying to work out, because prior to the 1st of July, we would have taken that complaint for that person. After the 1st of July, there was some lack of clarity, I suppose. We were trying to work out where, because some of the LACs were sort of seen as, at this point in time, have transitioned and they're in the NDIA realm. From latest conversations in DSC, we believe that if there is a concern that a person who is not yet a participant has an experience that they're dissatisfied with their LAC, give us a call first and we'll be able to have that conversation, because at that point in time, that person isn't a participant. They still need to be able to have the right to raise concerns about lack of communication, not about the outcome of the plan. But if their experience, the LAC hasn't turned up, didn't return their calls, been waiting for 6 months, that continues, then what I'd ask is to call our office at this point in time.
Maybe one more question, if that's okay.
Question about issues that are maybe outside of your jurisdiction. When you're investigating a complaint, for example, you come across an example of fraud. What do each of you do with it? 2, child protection. 3, domestic violence. And 4, intimidation and coercion. what do you do with those?
So within the NDIS, that through last year, the establishment of a fraud and investigations team occurred, so that if there was any suspicion of fraud occurring, that would be forwarded on to our fraud and investigations team for their close examination. And already prosecutions are occurring where fraud has been found to be occurring. With child protection, we work closely with the staff within the child protection area of Victoria, and that often people with child protection, justice, significant mental health concerns might fall into being supported through our complex support needs pathway, and because their lives intersect across a whole range of areas, or the very soon to hit the streets exceptionally complex support needs pathway. And so a provider of that support where, often where there's particularly significant behaviours of concern, and that particular support is needed to help them with accessing supports, that we would have the pathway determine that that would be the suitable point of contact for those participants. And so we work, with Trevor, with all those mainstream areas to ensure that the pathway, which means we need to know. So we need to know that there are those circumstances occurring in a person's life, that so that we can determine the right pathway. So whether it's through access or planning at any stage, to know that there are those connections in a person's life, and that perhaps other consideration for support needs to be given, we need to have that information available, and so that can come into us at any time in any way. And the last group I couldn't comment on, I'm not sure. Yeah.
That's okay, because we seem to have run out of time. But I would like to thank our panel, and I'm sure you would too. And here's a little gift for you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Hi, I'm Sam Drummond, and I'd like to thank Eva as well for moderating today's sessions. So I'm just going to take a few minutes of your time to wrap up. As I said, I'm Sam Drummond, and I'll move out of the way. I'm a lawyer with Victoria Legal Aid's Equality Law program. We're a small team of lawyers who represent people in discrimination cases, including people getting in the way of Auslan translators and sizes of lecterns. I do want to take the opportunity to thank all of our panellists today. We heard from Professor Bruce Bonahardy about the importance of focusing on quality and quantity, and he gave us 10 key actions as we go into the future, including shifting the focus from a short term to a long term. We heard it from our panel on bureaucracy versus human rights in the NDIS context, with Barbara Jezek from the Consumer Action Law Centre, John Chesterman from the Office of the Public Advocate, and Lucy Adams from Victoria Legal Aid, and they talked about the challenges of the market can pose and the importance of making accessible services within the scheme itself. And then we've just heard our esteemed colleagues here on navigating the NDIS, from Chris Cahill from the NDIA, Fiona Sawyers from the Commonwealth Ombudsman, Samantha Dooley, Office of the Disability Services Commissioner, and Miranda Bruyniks, NDIS Quality and Safeguard Commission. And I think it was good to hear about the range and volumes of the complaints that people are making, that people want to be involved in solutions to issues, and the importance of working together to make sure complaints are handled in the best possible manner. I do want to thank Eva again for moderating, and the Office of the Disability Services Commissioner for sponsoring Eva today. So thanks very much for that funding. And a thank you to Daru, who have provided VicDAN with the forum to put on this afternoon today. And for anyone, if your organisation is Victorian and you do not yet sit on the Victorian Disability Advocacy Network, feel free to come to our meetings where we really lambast Chris here and give him a hard go. And I want to thank you all for coming today. And before I do that, I should thank Bianca, who's been, and also Danielle as well, who've been walking around with the microphones. And Bianca's just been putting in such hard work, making this all to come together. So thank you to them. But thank you to all of you. And I do want to share some news with you, just to wrap this all up. Like many others in this room, I have a disability. When I was diagnosed at 18 months, people expressed sympathy to my parents, and it might be familiar to you. Gone were the dreams of a son playing cricket for Australia. Through regular surgeries with well-meaning doctors trying to mould me into their view of normality, people expressed sympathy to me, as though a get-well balloon would ease the pain. At school, teachers with little training and inadequate resources too often left me on the sideline with the other kids who were also in need of sympathy. As a young adult, strangers would sympathise with my friends for doing the good thing of hanging out with me. The same friends would roll their eyes and make some quip about bad jokes that I tell. But by no means are my experiences unique for people with disabilities, like you all know. And it was not sympathy that allowed me to follow my dreams. Instead, it was the teacher who made a little adjustment in classes to include me. It was the friend's grandmother who gave me a book instead of a balloon. It was the boss who went against the grain and gave me my first job. It's when sympathy is given that dignity is taken away. But when we replace sympathy with understanding, a whole world can open up. The news I want to share is that my partner and I are expecting a new human addition to our family in 3 months. Which happens to a lot of people, but it's the scariest thing that I've ever done. And it's not helped by a system that's trained in the art of sympathy. In the 20-week ultrasound, the doctor became very interested in me when they'd normally be interested in the person with the bulging belly. He asked what my disability is. I told him I named my form of dwarfism. He wrote down another one. I corrected him. So your parents and siblings are short too, he asked. I told him I'm the only one in my family. Oh, good, so it's not genetic then. I then explained that it is indeed genetic and gave him a brief tutorial. There is a 50% chance that this new person will inherit my disability. Oh, he said, turning to my partner, I'm sorry. My partner was bemused. It was like she was a freshly grieving family member, that we'd simply forgotten to have the discussions about the value of diversity of human experience, about my disability making me who I am, and how neither of us would change a thing. Don't be sorry. We've actually thought about this, she said. Then, paraphrasing Stella Young, explained, we don't think disability is a bad thing. The NDIS brings the promise of making this culture of sympathy a thing of the past for current and future generations. And you are the ones making sure it delivers on this promise without becoming entangled in the matrix that it has the potential to become. I recently took up the advice of Morpheus from the Matrix, in that nobody can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. So I applied for the NDIS. I did it in anticipation of some of the upcoming challenges as a parent, but the countdown clock to our impending arrival is ticking, and I'm not holding my breath for the approval that would make things a whole lot smoother. But I rest easy at night because I know that there are people in this room and out in the wider world who know that sympathy gets us nowhere, and you're committed to changing this. So for all that you do and for the understanding you promote, I say thank you. Thanks. You can go home now.